Well, yes, it is 8 in the morning, so who knows what I'll be talking about. I guess I'll listen to myself later and find out. But first, I want to say how saddened I was to hear about Rolf's passing, because we had built so much all together, and it's now all gone. I'm sure he'll be with us in spirit as we talk about these issues. I just wanted to share with you a handout I sent. Roy, do you have the handout? Oh, there we go. Yes, because I want you to be able to sort of look through it when I'm talking about this issue. The one of remembrance, of course, is extremely important, and national remembrance, that is the collective remembrance of Turkish citizens, let's say, is yet another one. What is significant in terms of denialism during this period, I wanted to say, is the bifurcation in the remembrance that we see. The bifurcation basically refers to the end of the war, that's 1918-19, when, of course, the Ottoman Empire has lost the war, and then Britain, France, and Italy, and Greece all sort of come in at certain various points, and in a way, it's through their presence that we have the humanitarian aspect of what has been happening during this time, because this is the time when, of course, when the British come for the first time using the concept of crime against humanity, they do hold the Istanbul trials. And at the same time, there is the Near Eastern relief that is also taking place from the vantage point of Armenians as to what is happening. What is very interesting, and what I will be arguing, is that in spite of what I've told you in terms of humanitarianism and in a way the acknowledgement of the Armenian genocide, we have on the other side a totally different recollection of the same period. If we look at it from the vantage point of Turkish nation making, or the Turkish official history making, if you will. And so my argument is that the denialism is bifurcated at this point, where basically, especially in the earlier period, 1919 to 1922, there are two governments, one in Istanbul, of course. That's my cat who decided to join. Okay, move. And then the other one is the Ankara government. And this is, I wanted to point out the connection between political structure and remembrance. What happens is that if we look at things from the vantage point of the Istanbul government, there is acknowledgement of the Armenian genocide, at least by, the Ottoman governance, as well as, of course, the British occupation forces. But on the other hand, if you look at the whole process from the vantage point of the Ankara government, there is total silence. So that is what I wanted to talk about. The acknowledgement there has to be for the denial not to take place is not there to begin with. The Istanbul courts, the Armenian genocide and its memories and what is done in relation to it is literally totally missing from the point of view of the Ankara government. And that is why when you see the handout I have, what I did was I asked, how is it that the Turkish citizens people in Turkey, Turkish state and society remembers this period. What is it that stands out in that? And that is why I went through and made a list of all the things that official history writing in Turkey deemed important to note. And that is what I have here. What I want you to sort of see is that throughout the whole process, I think that between 1919 and 38, which is when the Second World starts, there are three sort of periods that are remembered in official Turkish history making. The first has to deal with the independence struggle. That's the 1919-22 period, and this is crucial in terms of the formation of Turkish national memory. Especially if you want to emphasize the humanitarian aid and the Near Eastern relief and the trials, of course, in Istanbul. This is when this is the period that is to be acknowledged. But if we look at that period, the independence struggle period, in terms of the handout, you will see that. Can you put the handout? You will see that. I cannot, this isn't the whole thing. How can I scroll down? Okay, there. So I just want the first part to be before 1923. Can I have part one? Scrolled up a bit. Well, now I see the other one.
We actually can, yeah. So okay. You have to start with one and then go on to the next.
Go to the other one. Okay. So what is very important from their vantage point, from the vantage point of the Ankara government, that is that in all of the sort of coverage of the independence struggle, you see, I sort of said, what is happening here is that, as you know, Talat Enver Cemal Pashas are sort of out. They leave, at least Talat and Enver does, and Cemal too. And then when they are gone, what is interesting is that, of course, it's the same Union and Progress that actually asks Mustafa Kemal to lead with a retinue the independence struggle, and he leaves for Samsun on 19th of May 1919 to start the independence struggle. And it is interesting, as Hülya Adak has also demonstrated, is that in the making of national memory, Turkish official national memory, the nutuk that Atatürk delivers in 1927 later on is crucial. You see that the independence struggle period is based in terms of remembrance by Atatürk's nutuk in 1927, because the very long speech he gave has been used as the basis of Turkish national memory. And as such, Hülya and others have very nicely shown that memory obviously starts with the first sentence of the nutuk is, I alighted in Samsun on 19th of May 1919, making everything before that prehistory. And because of that, then, obviously, 1915 to 17, which was the height of the massacres and the Armenian genocide, basically, is therefore located in prehistory and is not acknowledged as a consequence. But then, of course, this is also the period, if you think about it. So in a way, that is why the sort of Armenian genocide is not there, because it is excluded as in the formation of Turkish national memory is what I'm saying. And that exclusion, I argue in this paper, continues during the interwar period from 1919 to 38, because this is the period, as I said, the Istanbul trials happen. When the Istanbul trials happen, and I mean, and in addition, there are attempts also for Near Eastern relief, orphanages and everything, as people are trying to basically come to terms with the terrible destruction that the genocide has brought. But none of that is in Turkish national memory either, from 1919 to 38. If you look at sort of the main points that are made about the independence struggle, what is emphasized is Atatürk and Atatürk alone, not even the retinue he has, because the retinue, of course, would demonstrate, as Eric Zürcher has done, the significance of the Union on Progress and the continuity of the perpetrators, of course, from one context to the other context. But that is, it emphasizes Atatürk's sort of struggles and totally silences what has been going on in Istanbul at the time. With the Istanbul government. And that is where the acknowledgement, albeit very briefly, public acknowledgement of the genocide occurred. So that is, I think, the major difference is that from the vantage point of the Istanbul government, if we look at it, the history writing emphasizes, of course, the most important things as the Istanbul trials that have happened, as well as the sort of the Near Eastern relief and the humanitarian efforts. But if you look at the same period from the vantage point of the Ankara government, which became the Turkish national memory eventually, led by Atatürk, you realize that all of that all of that acknowledgement is not there at all. And what is also very significant is that when, and this is what I talk about here, when the Ankara government is sort of putting together sort of the national struggle, they purposefully leave out all the minorities, the traditional minorities of the Ottoman Empire, that's Greeks, Jews, and Armenians, from participating in the independence struggle. So there is an exclusion, a violence, so to speak, of excluding minorities, the Ottoman minorities, from the body politic of the Turkish nation state at that juncture. And that, I think, is very crucial, because it is, through that exclusion that we do not, in a way, acknowledge in the long term the violence that went on basically during, that had gone on between 1915 17, but in addition to the violence that continued in Anatolia, especially during the independence struggle, 1919-1922, when many of the, especially Armenians that went back to Cilicia and the territories around it with the French occupation, are not at all mentioned and are not at all taken into consideration. So they are purposefully left by the Ankara government out of the nation formation, and because they are left out, as a consequence, they never are made a part of what's going on later on. And this is basically very much sort of supplemented by what happens then during the second period. Can I have the second period, please? And the establishment and institutionalization of the Turkish Republic, I say, the period from 1923 to 33 is seen as sort of the first decade of the Turkish Republic. And what is crucial during this period, again, is some of the exclusion that occurs. And what is, for example, not said, and I emphasize this here, you see how the exclusion of the minorities, the religious minorities, is accompanied by the inclusion, symbolic inclusion of the Kurds, who become, of course, the most significant indigenous sort of group left in Asia Minor. Of course, what the Ankara government does is, in order to sort of take them to their own side against the British, French, Italians, or the Western powers, is that they promise the Kurds local sovereignty in their in running their affairs initially, and they renege on this promise as well. So that in the case of the Kurds, unlike let's say Jews, Greeks, and Armenians, they are first invited and to be a part of the Turkish body politic, but then basically this acknowledgement is withdrawn with the emergence, of course, of the Lausanne Treaty and further international recognition of Turkey as a republic. And that is why we have, until today, the sort of silencing of this acknowledgement, official silencing of this acknowledgement on the one side, and the rebellions, I mean, of the Kurds naturally on the other, because these promises have not been kept and they have been erased from history. So I think that is probably the most significant political violence that occurs during this period, in a way, because Kurds and their agency is not also recognized. There is also no recognition of the role the Kurds played, both during the genocide and afterward. And that further, I would say, bifurcates the memory of the past from the vantage point of the Kurds versus the Turkish state. And the silencing then goes on at another level with the Kurds. What is instead emphasized in this period, if I may have the second part of this, is that you see that there is a lot of, again, the exclusion sort of continues in the sense that they are all treated as social groups, communities who then give these communal rights to become Turkish citizens, so to speak. But we know from the work of Hannah Arendt and others, is that when you go from communal rights, from protecting communal rights to protecting individual rights, you, of course, make people much more vulnerable because they are not protected as a community. The state then becomes very crucial on what rights people have and if they can practice those rights. And that is when I think, even though all these minorities do become Turkish citizens, nevertheless, they are silenced in the public sphere. And not only that, but in addition, the properties, goods, and anything that sort of are remembered or left behind are also taken back legally. And as a consequence, they do not have those rights over their own properties, and once they have left, they cannot come back, the minorities, I mean. So that is probably the most significant. Can I go back to the handout, please? Yeah, just keep it there. I don't, yeah. Yes. So what is, again, important, as I said, during this period is, in addition to silencing what is happening, from the vantage point of the minorities or the Ottoman governance. They also, in addition, try to create a whole new national memory. And this is the time when you have, in attempts for a sort of Turkish nation formation, the Turkish history thesis, sort of the Sun language theory, and all these nationalist sort of rhetoric that comes in instead of research, let's say. And this is what is presented as happening in terms of Turkish nation formation. And in addition, of course, this is also the time where the independence tribunals, another legal body, is there that physically destroys literally the opposition, any opposition the Turkish nation state would have on its lands. And what is emphasized in this period is the significance of the reforms and how that has shaped the nation. And you do see here the national colonization of ideas of the past that occurs, of course, with the official creation myths that are emphasized here. When you look at then the last period I made, the 1934-38, what we see in this period, I think, is the institutionalization of violence in the Turkish Republic. And yes, here what you see during this sort of crucial period before the beginning of the Second World War is again sort of the secularization of the public sphere, the sort of gradual marginalization of religion as a base of meaning making. And in addition, of course, signing international treaties with the sort of the neighbors, so to speak, therefore internationally further acknowledging sort of the presence of the new Turkish state. And then it ends dramatically, this period in 1938, of course, when Mustafa Kemal Atatürk dies on 10th of November 1938. What is very important before that also, in terms of sort of who are going to make national history, who are going to construct history making in the Turkish Republic, is answered by the political struggle we see at the very end, because in 37, when Mustafa Kemal is ill with cirrhosis of the liver, he donates all of his goods property to the Turkish nation before his death, and he becomes, so to speak, as also Hülya Adak says, one with the nation, yeah, symbolically. And there is a shift. İnönü, İsmet İnönü, there is a rift, people argue, between İnönü and Atatürk at this very end. And İnönü, of course, resigns, and it is Celal Bayar, the civilian, basically, who used to be a part of the Union and Progress, especially the special organization, and was very active in the destruction of at least of the Aegean, of the Greeks on the Aegean side before the start of the Armenian genocide. He becomes the one who sort of formulates the government, and İsmet İnönü, of course, who was a general like Mustafa Kemal, sort of resigned and is marginalized. People argue that this is when Atatürk thought about the future of the nation, and he wanted to have a sort of civilian continuity rather than a military continuity. But even though he marginalizes İnönü in this way, when Atatürk eventually dies, it is İnönü sort of who comes back to power in Bayar's stead, and Bayar is basically marginalized in the next 20, 30 years. He comes there in his stead, and because of the support he has of the military. And I would argue that it is this shift that then leads, of course, the military, the Turkish military, to be the main actors in meaning making in the Turkish Republic, at least in the first phase of the Turkish Republic. People argue until the emergence, of course, of AK Party from 2003 onwards, when you do have gradually an alternate history remembrance that comes into place. But what is very interesting, of course, about that remembrance is that when it looks back into Turkish history, it looks at history from the vantage point of the Ankara government. And as a consequence, the humanitarian aid, the trials, Near Eastern relief, all of that is silenced in that history making as well, one that continues to this day. So if we look at things from this vantage point, we realize that this is a period in sort of remembrance that systematically silences the Armenian genocide in the past, and the continuities of it, basically of the massacres of the minorities, especially Greeks, in addition to the Armenians during the interwar period. This is all silenced from the vantage point of the Ankara government, and therefore, from then onwards, you do not have any acknowledgement of what happens to the marginalized minorities and the religious minorities, then added on during the Republican period of the marginalized vantage point, of course, of the Kurds as well. So what we have is a sanitized national memory that emerges as a consequence of this one that does not in any way recognize the violence in Turkey's past. And not only that, of course, but this lack of recognition then continues to this day. And from that vantage point, I think what the interwar period demonstrates in terms of the formation of the Turkish Republic is the bifurcation of remembrance, and all the acknowledgement such as existed in Istanbul it still continues, but on the other hand, none of that is even mentioned when you look at things from the vantage point of the Ankara government. And it is the social realities of the Ankara government and the way they saw what was going on that is put forth as well. I mean, and a good example of this is, for example, the Arbor Commission, which sort of is very active during this time. As they go, I mean, the American sort of formulated commission that tried to see if it is possible to have a mandate there, whether it is possible to build an Armenian state and such. And if you look at the events from the vantage point of the Istanbul government, this is followed very carefully over there. But from the vantage point of the Ankara government, there is almost no mention of the Arbor Commission at all, even though Mustafa Kemal meets with them and promises them that the Greeks, Armenians, especially Armenians, will be treated equally and will be protected just as much as other citizens or subjects at that particular period. And that also is not mentioned much at all in the memoirs that I have looked at as well, the contemporaneous memoirs, whereas the emphasis is much more on the political struggles, the battles, and the eventual victory, basically, of the independence movement in forming their own nation state. And this is a time, of course, where if you look at Europe, the struggles are very different. I mean, there, the main problem with sort of nation state formation is that they are trying to sort of there is a lot of sanctions placed upon Germany, and the whole issue is to see whether any nation formation would be possible in that context, is what they're struggling with, as of course Germany has a very hard time trying to pay all the war reparations. So there's a whole different focus, again, if you look at European history and what they privileged in their history writing as well. So just to conclude then, from in terms of what's happening in the interwar period, we seem to have very different remembrances of the past that are set up by the Ankara government that is leading the independence movement in Turkey, the Istanbul government that is leading the independence trial, and until, of course, they are then basically in 1924 totally taken over by the Turkish state. And then we have sort of the European governments that are focusing much more on what is happening in Europe and who is going to survive as what nation. That seems to be their priority. As a consequence, I wanted to demonstrate to you how sort of the violence of the Armenian genocide becomes muted and silenced in the national context. And it is that national context that informs, even today, the contemporaneous sort of history making, official history making in Turkey. Thank you. That is all I wanted to say.
Müge, thank you very much for this very systematical and detailed approach of denialism in the interwar period. Just for our viewers online, you can, if you have questions, please write them in the chat, and I can refer them to Müge. So take your time. We have a little bit of that, around about 10 minutes maximum, to discuss some points. So Müge, maybe we can start a little bit with going more into the present. I mean, the conference, of course, is focused on the interwar period, but I mean, you very convincingly told us the story of this, you can say, denialism laboratory of the young Turkish Republic. So it seems there were perfect conditions, I mean, in a negative way, in these times compared, for example, to Europe, which you mentioned. And also, I mean, we heard this morning from Stefan and Momme, and yesterday the keynote, also, of course, the violence in Eastern Europe. But there, this kind of denialism couldn't cling because of this of another political, let's say, situation that was a little bit larger than the Soviet Union and so on. So so if we go to the present, what would you say? How does the story continues? And do you think this form of denialisms, how did they transform in the, let's say, last 11 years? I mean, your book ends in 2009. So what would you say? I mean, in
happened
terms of
since
denialism,
then.
forms of yeah, of course. But do you think there's a transformation, a new kind of pre-histories told?
Well, I think, that's a very good question, Roy. I mean, I would argue, for example, that in 2003, with the coming to power of Justice and Development Party, and of course, eventually first Abdullah Gül and then Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who has now taken over the party and sort of hegemonized at least his views as the view. Initially, I was very heartened by the fact that he again came against this acknowledgement of this lack of acknowledgement by the Turkish nation state of the violence in its past, especially against sort of the religious people who were also, of course, marginalized because of the sort of the secularization process that was going on in Turkey. I said, well, here is this guy, he should know. He was marginalized in terms of religion, and so he should probably be more open to the marginalizations that happened in our own history in the past. But I was unfortunately not right, even though initially Justice and Development Party sort of came and had a liberal ideology, one that was going to acknowledge sort of what Europe wanted in terms of its past, with the intent to join the European Union. With time, it became evident, at least I guess, that this was not what he intended. Instead of acknowledging the past, therefore including all those that had been left out of the Turkish body politic, namely Greeks, Jews, Armenians on the one side, and later the Kurds, of course, on the other. Instead, he engaged in religious nationalism, and I think what he has at least emphasized is direct reference to the Ottoman past. So in a way, you say, well, this is great. If he is acknowledging the Ottoman past, then he should then look at all the sort of the history and what has happened, especially in the interwar period, from the vantage point of the Istanbul government, that used to exist, right? No, there you see cherry picking, so to speak, a selectivity that comes in, a sort of a religious national selectivity, so to speak, so that the Ottoman Empire that sort of he envisions is one that sort of is idealized. We don't even know which period of the Ottoman Empire he sort of is referring to. Basically, is it Fatih Sultan Mehmet and the conquest of Constantinople? Is it later Süleyman the Magnificent and sort of the context of Europe? Is it, Selim II earlier and sort of the conquest of the Arabian Peninsula and such? So there is none of that basically. It's hard to know which one is what he has in his mind's eye, because he doesn't look at history as we do academically, but rather he looks at history, I would say, much more nationalistically, rhetorically. And as a consequence, he too did not recognize any of the violence, except for a very brief period with Ahmet Davutoğlu, when you can see him basically sort of having these apologies, so to speak, with respect to what has happened to the past, but apologies that only were made rhetorically and weren't acted upon.
Thanks, Müge. I mean, this is maybe, I don't know, maybe in 20 years we can speak historically, academically about this time in a better way. I don't know. So there are there's a question in our audience. Çalak Kave, yeah, please go to the microphone, and then you should hear this, Müge, and see Çalak as well.
Thank you for your introduction. And I mean, my question, I have a short comment, and it touches upon partly what Roy touched upon. Is in your third section, I think it would be interesting to have the Dersim massacre. I mean, if you call it massacre or genocide, I don't care, basically. In my opinion, it's not important. But what is important is the insurgency against the state and the counter-insurgency. As you know, I'm sure it starts with Yeah, and it starts with explosion of this bridge and cutting of telegraph lines, which is a direct provocation, some would say. But to that point and to Roy's question, in 2011, Erdogan came with this half-hearted apology, which is actually don't come with half-hearted apology, but yeah. So it's better not to apologize. Another point which is important in this remembrance is his party group meeting in 2013. I'm not sure about the date, but he holds, I think, half an hour, 45 minutes speech about the early protocols from the Republic and how Kurds and Kurdistan and other issues were touched upon by that parliament, which in remembrance studies would be interesting point of view. Of course, the context in 2013 was competition with CHP and Kılıçdaroğlu, and kind of inviting to a match basically. So that was my.
That's a wonderful question, and you're absolutely right in the sense that that is why, for example, I'm now looking at my next sort of empirical book will be focusing on the violence against the Kurds, because I think there is a very significant continuity between the violence committed against the religious minorities, the traditional religious minorities of the Ottoman period, basically Greeks, Jews, and Armenians, and later, of course, the same cadres, the same sort of rationale is then used to exclude the Kurds from the national body politic. And I would argue that the lack of accountability with respect to the violence the state and society committed against the Armenians enables and emboldens those who have been involved in that violence to then carry out the same massacres, I would say genocidal massacres against the Kurds. So there is, I think, that very important legacy that is set by this interwar period with respect to how not only Greeks, Jews, and Armenians, but also Kurds are treated. So that becomes very crucial. Once again, I thought, given sort of the patterns that develop once, Erdogan came to power, even though he was marginalized, he and his social group of religiously conservative people were marginalized initially, that they would also bring the Kurds that were also marginalized as a part of the body politic. But that didn't happen. At that point, I think you have sort of ethnic nationalism that is very strong in Turkey, and especially because of sort of the conservative segments of the Turkish population, the National Action Party and such, that denial of violence against the Kurds instead continued. Except for Ahmet Davutoğlu's sort of zero conflict policy and all that, that was briefly there after Erdogan emerged as the sort of autocrat, let's say, next Atatürk in terms of hegemonizing the discourse. He totally excluded the Kurds from that process as well, and as well as the massacres, of course, that have continued, the violence that has continued against the Kurds, not only, physically because of their destruction, but also, I would say, socially and politically, as there is literally no public space left for Kurds to exist in their own terms in Turkey today, and the aggression continues to this day.
Thank you very much. We are very looking forward to read this book. Yeah, I don't ask when it's done. So it's Yeah, we have to move forward. Actually, Müge. I mean,
Okay.
it was very nice to see you, to hear you, to get your input and the discussion. You can still be joining the panel in the background and see everything, but we now switch over to Michael B. Elm, who's the next speaker. So
Thank
thank you
you.
very much again, Müge, and
Thank you.
yeah, see and hear you soon. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.